In this video, my favorite marker brand has just released a completely new line of markers. The double-sided acrylic markers, paint pens that I'm going to put up against their competition to see if they hold up just as well as the Ohuhu alcohol markers stand up to their competition. Now let me preface by saying that this video is sponsored by Ohuhu. They wanted me to try and share my thoughts with you, the good and the not so good, and the totally surprising use case that really took me by surprise and had me pretty delighted. It's Ohuhu's 8th anniversary and they're having a huge sale, so I'll tell you more about that later in the video, but let's get started by checking out the brand new line of markers. I honestly didn't know what to expect. I've always associated Ohuhu with the alcohol markers, so I was really curious to see how these paint pens would stack up. The 30 markers come in a really nice portable case, which when you open it up comes with spare nibs and swatch sheets, so you can test the opacity and colors on both dark and light. Which is great because the first thing we do when we try out a new medium is swatch out. That was terrible. My initial impression is good. The colors go down nicely, there's plenty of opacity, and without directly comparing it to anything else, I'd be pretty happy if this was what I got and I'd never had any experience with paint markers before. Seems really user-friendly and I love that they're double-sided. However, when people think paint markers, they usually think of Posca. So I'm gonna put them to the test against Posca and give you my genuine impressions between the two, the underdog versus the big dog. Starting off just by testing the tips in general. Right off the bat, at least in terms of the ability to go big, Posca definitely comes out on top. The bullet nib of the Ohuhu paint markers is about the same size as the small nib on the Posca markers. And then the small nib on the Ohuhu markers is obviously even smaller and is surprisingly awesome. The ability to go super fine is really cool. And I actually haven't seen this in paint markers before, at least not in this sort of combination and variety. So let's pit the colors against each other. I picked a handful of colors from both with a line down the middle just to sort of see how the opacity compares, and filled in a couple of rows with Ohuhu on the left and Posca on the right. As you can see, when you directly compare them, the vibrancy of the colors of the Posca markers are stronger. It's a richer tone and it almost feels like the colors on the left, which are the Ohuhu, are more pastel, almost like they have a tiny drop of white paint in each of the markers, just slightly diluting it. So if you're looking for really rich colors, Poscas do seem to come out on top here. But now I want to see how the Ohuhu paint markers, which these are the Kakako? I'm just gonna call them Ohuhu paint markers. I wanna see how they feel in combination with each other in a more ambitious piece. So I'm gonna do a bit of a Pokemon piece, which obviously come in a huge variety of colors, and I wanna try and use the base colors as well as mixing in metallics and fluoros. Because in the base set, half of the 30 markers are made up of your primaries, some secondaries, black, white, and some grays, and the other half is made up of metallics and fluoros, which is quite a variety. And the metallics in particular come with a good range of color and are pretty cool. Now I've picked my Pokemon based on the colors that I have, which is where I noticed that, okay, I'm a little bit limited here. That is kind of a pain point of paint markers in general, and I know when I went shopping for Poscas, you can't really justify getting the small pack. You have to get the bigger pack, and then even with the full packs, which I mean, I have a lot of Poscas, I still don't feel like I have all the colors I want. That's one of the trade-offs of working with paint markers. You just can't really often get exactly the right paint. But with that said, when the colors started going down, general tones seem to work really well, and they seem to work with each other really well. The metallics on the steel Pokemon went down pretty well, but it's on paper, so if anything scuffs up the paper, the metallic sort of reflects with the scuff, so it's not ideal. And then I filled in the background entirely with the neons or fluoro colors, which worked surprisingly well. Usually I don't love how fluoro colors and plain colors work together. In this case, it worked to serve as a pretty nice background framing my piece. Last but not least, my favorite part, going around with a black marker to do the lines. And this is where the dual tip comes in really handy. Not only can I have the details of the Pokemon in more fine areas, I can have those thick, solid, chunky outlines to really give depth to the piece and make each of them feel really solid. And the overall effect of the piece, I think, is really striking. It works really well. And for the fact that I use pretty much one layer everywhere, this holds up really well in terms of opacity. But let's face it, if I was going to do a piece like this, I would be doing it with alcohol markers, even water-based markers. I don't really use paint pens for paper. I do, however, use them in mixed media ways or on things, like when I painted my little AirPods case. This is Posca's. It's a little worse for wear, but I do have another pair of AirPods ready to customize, so now we can have an apples to apples comparison. So I set about masking it all up with tape and blue tack and then giving it a base coat with some spray paint. I spray painted with a light fleshy color base tone simply because there isn't a peachy flesh color in the Ohuhu mix of colors, which I was pretty bummed out by. That is one color I really wish that they had in here. So I covered that need with the spray paint base and went on to sketching my little fella who was gonna open his mouth up to reveal the AirPods. This one's a really cute, stocky little businessman, I don't know. I still wanted to use colors though and not go with boring business colors, so a nice aqua green shirt with some lovely mauve pants, and then on to adding some of those nice details with some of the darker color pens, and last but not least, my favorite step, those crispy black lines. The result is really fun. I love it. And I also love that there's enough of a variety of colors and that I have the fine tips that I can get some details in there and it looks and feels really cool. And that got me thinking, I wonder how fine you can paint with the fine tip. And as a hobbyist myself, there's not much finer painting that you can do than miniature painting. One of my favorite things to do, and all of a sudden, a whole new world of possibilities opened up. So I grabbed a space bear. This is one of the models from the Kickstarter that we did over on Tabletop Time of our own design from my custom chapter. I really love this guy. And he's a really chunky model with pretty easy to touch on areas. So I thought I'd give it a go painting him up using just these paint markers. He's already had a base coat with just a black spray paint, a really soft brown zenithal highlight. So I went about my model filling in the reds of the cape and cloth, the brass of the trims, and the silver on the metal areas, then onto the brown in the fur. Now I have to say, this all worked surprisingly well, and just the result of a layer or two of just the paint markers on these areas makes for a pretty tabletop ready, decent looking model. But if there's anything I love, it's cheating by adding extra detail and a bit of grit by using some grimes. In this case, I use an enamel track wash and pull it back with some white spirits and a woolly dauber, which when it dries creates a nice grimy aesthetic all the way around with a bit of a matte finish that also fills in and darkens in some of those shadows and detail, which also turns that cape from a single tone cape into more of a two-tone shaded looking cape. Last but not least, I throw some grass on the base and paint some rough snow texture with a Citadel color blizzard paint, which really, when you think about it, is just two really basic effects layers on top of a really basic paint pen paint job. And the result, honestly, I think is astounding for the amount of time I spent on it. This feels like a bigger deal than I think I can get across here, because miniature painting, not only is it time consuming, but there's this huge mental hurdle when it comes to like setting up and packing up. I mean, for me, to miniature paint, I need my paints, I need my paintbrush, I need water to wash my brush, I need paper towel to clean everything up and dry my brush, and I like to use a wet palette. It takes 20 minutes to set up. It's a pretty cumbersome and a bit messy setup, and then I have to pack it up after. Painting that miniature took a fraction of the time, and I didn't use a brush rush up until those final technical steps when I'd finished painting. Like, you could take a few markers and some primed models onto a bus and paint your miniatures on a commute. That hasn't existed before until now for me. I'm very excited. Just to drive the point home, this is a Blood Angel I painted up for the Tabletop Time channel a year or two ago, and I actually have the original footage so I could reference how long it took me. But before I tell you that, let's quickly paint up another Blood Angel. And by paint job, I mean paint pen job, using my metallic markers to highlight the gold trims, the silvers, and the gunmetal greys. And in fact, I had a timer going throughout the paint job just so I could make sure I knew exactly how long it took to paint my Space Marine. And it took me 8 minutes to do the basic paint job. Now, that's not including any extra effects. I like to finish off the models by quickly painting the base, in this case, drawing on the base, and again, giving it a quick wash of grime, pulling it back again, then putting some PVA down on that base and putting on some static grass. And with the base trim applied, the finished result when compared to the original Space Marine is pretty comparable. Now, the one on the left is a bit neater, partially because the one on the right that I've just done has been painted 2 times, and when I was applying the grime, I broke him off of his base, and let's just say it wasn't the most delicate grime application. So, you know, it could be a little neater than I ended up pulling off here. But I still think the results speak for themselves, especially when you consider that the one on the left took me over an hour to paint, and the one on the right took me 8 minutes. 10 or 11 if you include those technical steps. I did not expect that my review and use of these Ohuhu paint markers would lead me to miniature painting. But in a way, I think that's kind of cool because I've used loads of other paint markers and they all feel the same. Some feel a bit better. There's a reason Posca are at the top. They have a huge range and do come in large sizes. So for when it comes to murals and larger paint jobs on walls and stuff, it's hard to beat that. And let's face it, this is Ohuhu's earlier foray into the paint marker realm. But when it comes to art and illustration and more nuanced and fine application, this is a fantastic option, especially because it's incredibly affordable compared to Posca's especially. Even more affordable if you get them in their sale, because for the 8th anniversary from June 1st to June 30th, Ohuhu is having massive discounts where you get 15% off of orders over $169, 20% off of orders over $269, and a quarter off of your order, 25% off if you spend over $399. These Ohuhu paint pens excel in terms of detail and precision with that extra tip on the back, durability because the nibs feel fantastic and aren't anywhere near as flimsy feeling as the Posca tips, and the fact that they're super affordable and beginner friendly. This is only $35. And again, even less if you get it with the discount. And that's huge when you consider if you wanted to get the same range of colors in the 2 sizes of Posca's, you'd be spending hundreds. So if you've been tempted by that full set of Honolulu markers, and if you like the look of these awesome paint pens, now's the time to get them. Ohuhu, if you will take my advice, I highly recommend taking half of these and separating them. So have a 6 or 7 metallics pack, have a 6 or 7 neons pack, and have 30 colors. And please have more skin tones, more grays, and just some darker colors. I have really had a lot of fun using these and have been delighted and surprised by the applications that you could use them in. This is genuinely the first time I have ever used paint pens in fine detail like this in a way that I think is actually practical for a hobby like mini painting. And of course that extends to loads of other things like illustration and customizing. Hit the like button if you had some fun, subscribe for more fun with art and creativity. Otherwise, that's it for now. And until next time, I'll see you later.